Good morning and a very warm welcome to this ICAS webinar in collaboration with Independent Women, which is part of Mazar. I'm Justine Ricomany and I head up the employment and devolved taxes side of things here at ICAS. Our event this morning will last an hour and we'll be sharing valuable insights via panel discussion around the incredibly important topic of controlling your financial affairs as a woman. Of course, if there are any men out there as well, we will operate an open door policy, so please listen in. Before we begin, though, just a few housekeeping matters to remind you of. You can submit questions at any time through the Q&A facility, which can be accessed at the top of your screen. Questions can be submitted anonymously. We'll be saving all your questions until the end of the webinar and run a live Q&A session at that point. So please also join in the conversation today through the chat box, which is accessed at the top of your screen. This allows for you to comment or discuss with fellow attendees on matters covered by this webinar. We're recording the webinar. We'll make it available for on-demand viewing afterwards in case you want to refer back to it or share it with others. And the slides will be available on the events page on the ICAS website under the events listing. Everyone is on the webinar is automatically muted, so there's no need to be for you to be concerned about background noise wherever you may be. We'll be carrying out a poll at the end of the webinar with one question on it to gauge audience satisfaction, so please do take part in that. So we look forward to receiving your questions throughout the course of the webinar, and of course we will try to get to as many of them as possible. Whatever questions we don't manage to answer in the Q&A, we'll pop on a spreadsheet with the webinar recording and any slides. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by two fabulous ladies, Gillian Campbell from Shepherd and Wedderburn and Lindsay Doherty from Independent Women, part of Mazar. You're both fine examples of independent women yourselves, as we will soon find out, ladies. So now then, ladies, I've got some questions for you, but before I get into them, could each of you please briefly introduce yourselves and tell us what you work as? So I'll go with Lindsay first.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Doherty, and I am a financial advisor with Independent Women who form part of the Mazars LLP. So Independent Women, we're the UK's first and longest established independent financial advisor specialising in wealth planning for women. With that, I am really looking forward to discussing all things wealth management today and answering any burning questions that you might have.
Thank you. And Gillian?
Thanks, Justine. Yes, good morning from me too. I'm a partner with Shepherd and Wedderburn, a full suite law firm headquartered in Scotland, and I head up the private wealth and tax team for the north of Scotland. I'm based in our Aberdeen office, and the type of advice I give is regarding estate planning matters for families and individuals. Trying to manage the succession of wealth and keeping an eye on inheritance tax planning as we go along that journey.
That's great, thank you. So I'm sure that everyone will really enjoy listening to what you've got to say today. So I thought that we could run this together by having a chat which basically involves me firing questions at you. So I hope that's okay. So I'll just get on with my first question, which is, do you find that women's goals differ to those of men when it comes to wealth management? And I'll go with Lindsay for that one first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So there definitely is a difference between how men and women approach financial objectives and wealth management. And I think to understand that better, we need to look at the experiences that are more specific to women that are influencing that difference. So as we know, women typically live longer on average, and during their lifespans, we are more likely to experience a number of life events that are quite unique to us. And often that can result in us being more adversely affected financially, and as a result require a little bit of a different approach to finance. We know that women do take on the bulk of caring responsibilities within the household. They might need to take extended career breaks for caring for family members, for caring for children. And we do see that that provision for the family and for the household is a real focus for many women that we come to speak to. And actually around 80% of household spending is controlled by women. So that really does influence objectives when it comes to financial planning.
Yes, thank you. Oh, sorry, carry on.
No. I mean that is the kind of crux of it. It tells us that women's goal often differ from their male counterparts, and it's key to understand the drivers behind the objectives so that we can better provide a plan that manages that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a Venus and Mars thing going on, isn't there? But actually, I think in terms of financial planning, we've got to be very careful. Gillian, do you have anything you want to add at this particular moment?
I would definitely say that women tend to be more future thinking about protecting wealth for their families. When clients come in and they're initially doing some will planning with me, rather than just kind of thinking about set circumstances that are in front of people at that moment, I do find that women are looking at a bigger picture and a number of kind of different circumstances and what ifs. I don't see as much of that in men.
Okay, so let's say, have you seen some kind of shift, let's say, for example, in the last decade or so, in how women approach their financial affairs?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what's really important for us to note is that women's wealth has never been in a stronger place than it currently is in the UK and beyond. And we're actually expecting by the end of 2025 that 60% of the world's wealth will be estimated to be in women's hands, which is, a real change from where we've been over the last few decades. We've also seen that a recent study has shown that 70% of women who inherit wealth will switch advisors within 1 year of their partner's death. And that's telling us that there's a shift in how women approach the management of their wealth and the desire for them to feel that they have a trusted advisor relationship. With younger generations also, there's a greater education for financial resources. And again, people are feeling much more comfortable with investing their money for the long term. So for us as advisors, it's really great to see that shift, but it's also really important for us to develop and change our approach so that we're meeting the needs of the wider demographic.
I would just add to that, just from my experience as a solicitor. When I first started practicing, I was making wills and powers of attorney for clients, and as part of the project, if you like, I would always ask them if they have a financial advisor or planner working with them, and they often didn't. Whereas I'm finding now, vast majority of people say yes, absolutely. I've got such and such working for me, and then we have a conversation about whether that relationship is working for them. So yeah, just as a kind of wide point, I'm definitely seeing much more people. It's the norm to have a financial planner to help them along the road, which is great.
It is actually, and it shows that there is a lot more awareness amongst women that they do need to familiarise themselves with these issues and with the jargon and with all the terminology that goes with it as well, because it can be quite intimidating when you first start on this road. You don't know anything about it. So why is a financial plan so important? I mean, no matter what stage you are in your journey, what is there a best time to start speaking to a professional about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that having a financial plan is vital, irrespective of what age or what stage of life you're at. I would use the analogy of it's like running a marathon. You wouldn't just show up on the day and expect to perform really well. Whatever stage you're at, and I'm sure everyone on this call will have some form of financial goal, whether it's buying a house, repaying mortgage, retiring. And the first thing that we say to our clients is that you need to be really specific about what that looks like for you. What's the time frame? What's the amounts that we're looking at? And having that specific goal in mind means that you can work back, you can break your goal down into smaller, much more manageable milestones. Again, just like running a marathon. And for us as advisors, our role really is to provide that experience, that expertise, that knowledge and understanding of the economy, legislation, the world of finance, to really enable our clients to put themselves in the best place to meet those objectives. over the long term. So I would say there's no right or wrong time to start making a financial plan, but I would really encourage everybody to start to think about their own financial objectives and look at the steps that they can begin to take in order to meet those.
Thank you. And is there, when you're a young person who's starting off on this marathon, is there a cost burden to all of this? Because, you know, many people, young people are thinking about, you know, maybe getting married or having a mortgage, or, you know, they may have just started on that journey as well.
I think at any starting point, as I say, it's looking at that objective. Now, you don't need a financial advisor to tell you what your objectives are. You can really start to think about that yourself. And again, when we're starting to look at the initial steps that can be taken, having a good budget can be really important as a first step. You know, what can you save for the future? Those are all really important. Of course, we deal with people that have accumulated wealth over the long term and through their lives, but we can also support those that are at the earliest stage of their financial journey, whether that's doing a financial health check, putting in place financial protection, or just guiding those that maybe don't know where to start.
Yeah, and if people are young, let's say, should they have like an ideal monthly savings amount in mind, or, you know, like a percentage of salary, perhaps, appreciating that everybody's different, of course.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to say because everybody is so different and everybody's costs and outgoings will look quite different. But I think that every strong financial plan starts, as I said, with quantifiable objectives. But the second part of it is a strong sense of budget. There's lots of different rules of thumb and lots of different places that you can seek advice for this. But one way of starting to look at things is the 50-30-20 rule. So 50% of your income spent on your needs, you know, your groceries, your mortgage, whatever it may be. 30% on the nice to haves, the meals out, the holidays, etc. And then 20% on savings. Now, this is a starting point. It might work for some people, it won't work for others, but it's a good way to get you on the right track. And it's that solid budget that will keep you right.
I guess if you can get your head around those percentages and sort of have them in the back of your mind, then there's a possibility you might stick to them. So it's better than not having them, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So tell me something then. If a lady, let's say she's got two kids, you know, one might be, I don't know, 14 and the other one's 18. What would be a good way of saving for their benefit? Either perhaps as a single parent or even as part of a couple.
So I guess there's a few things to consider when you're looking at saving for your children. The first is the purpose of the savings. So is it for getting them on the property ladder? Is it for university? Is it longer term than that? The timescales, the second thing to look at, is at a 5-year time frame, 10-year plus. And then the last is access. Do you want the child to have access to that saving from a particular age, or would you rather retain control of it for as long as you need to? If the timescale is short, you might want to look at cash ISAs or high interest savings account. Bear in mind penalties for accessing early, or any savings income that's generated from a savings account, it can be taxed as income on the parents. So that's something to be mindful of. If it's a longer timescale, you might want to look at junior ISAs or normal ISAs. If the child's between 16 and 18, you can contribute to both on behalf of your child. If they're under 16, only a junior ISA available, but you've got an allowance of 9,000 per annum and it's tax-free growth. But the children do receive access to it at the age of 18. And the last thing that I'll say that's less common, but just as important, is junior self-invested personal pensions. You can help your child prepare early for their retirement by saving up to £3,600 gross to a pension on their behalf. Importantly, they won't have access to that fund until they reach retirement age, which is currently 55, albeit it's increasing, but it's a great way to get them starting to think about that longer term.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Very good idea. So let me turn to Gillian and ask, you know, keeping on the theme of children, if someone wants to start kind of mitigating, you know, some inheritance tax and they want to start planning for that, but they think that their children might not be old enough or perhaps not even responsible enough to receive large gifts of money outright. Is there anything that can potentially be done in that respect?
Yes, absolutely, Justine. And a good question for me. I think that it forms actually a large part of my kind of day-to-day and what I'm asked for advice on. So as a lot of people will know, you can make gifts to trust up to £325,000 in every 7-year period without triggering any inheritance tax lifetime charges. So, I mean, that is a lot of money and is more than, you know, what a lot of people would want to put in anyway. But using a trust for lifetime giving is really quite powerful and a really flexible arrangement. So sometimes, you know, people will be very happy to get the 7-year clock ticking as long as you live for 7 years after making a gift to an individual. It doesn't get kind of clawed back for the purposes of calculating inheritance tax. And you know, some clients just do it in that most straightforward of way. And the important thing is that is documented, a memorandum or deed of gift, and it's usually kept with the will, just to save the executors, if somebody dies prematurely, scrabbling about and trying to remember, you know, dates and amounts of gifts and things. So it's good to keep it some kind of gift register if outright gifts are being made. But often, as you say, people will identify that they've got an inheritance tax liability if they're to pass away. They want to start passing on wealth, but for a number of reasons, they don't want to give it outright to the children. So a trust structure would be the best thing. And by that, they can be trustees, they would be the settlers of the trust. They can appoint themselves as trustees of the trust with perhaps other family members, or often a professional, often will be asked to be a corporate trustee. And so they're keeping control. They're giving the financial advisor the instructions as they would if they owned the pot outright. And it's very flexible in terms of how that pot can be invested. It could just be put in a bank account, and you know, interest rates are quite good at the moment. If it's much more longer term, then it can be sitting around with the financial advisor and the trustees and deciding how best to invest it. But the children don't even, or it could be grandchildren. You know, often it's children. Often as well, it's grandchildren and they're, you know, very young, and it's about maybe funding for grandchildren's school fees or university fees and much longer term. And it would be a discretionary trust arrangement usually. So the classes of beneficiaries, rather than named beneficiaries, can just refer very flexibly to my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, my children, descendants, any trust set up for that person, all kept very, very vanilla, if you like, and it doesn't really say much. If anybody was to pick up a trust deed, they wouldn't see who was to get what or what the intention was. So there's privacy there, but there's also flexibility for going forward for the future. The grandchildren don't even need to know that this has been set up for them, which I think is an important point. Kids, you know, my clients often don't want their kids to know that there's this pot of, you know, a couple 100,000 sitting there for the future. So there are lots of benefits there, and the asset protection is there, that because not one beneficiary has an absolute right, nobody can say, right, Mr. Trustee, you know, I want my share of that. Nobody can demand anything. So it's good from the point of view if maybe children are going through, even as young adults, they're being quite reckless or in a stage of life, or there's maybe a girlfriend or a boyfriend around that parents don't like, or, you know, goes forward, there's maybe a spouse or civil partner that parents don't like, they know that the money is protected in that trust for the children, and even if there's some kind of breakup or separation, it can't be touched. It wouldn't be matrimonial property. So there are loads of benefits to using a trust structure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I think it's definitely something worth exploring for people, isn't it? And I suppose, you know, if women generally, you know, they have their children's, you know, well-being and protections at the forefront of their minds all the time. So, you know, is there anything that can be done to mitigate children acting recklessly? Because, you know, in every family, there's always one loose cannon. You know, you sometimes find this, don't you? And if their parents, say, were to die unexpectedly, and they inherited some cash or investments, say, such as shares or property, is there anything that can be done in that regard?
There is, and it comes down to trust planning again. So if somebody just made a very straightforward will and said, I leave everything to my husband or my wife on first death, and when they've both gone, just to my children, and just leave it like that, and I've seen many wills like that, then under Scots law, the children would be entitled to receive their inheritance at 16, because that's the age of legal capacity in Scotland, 18 in England and Wales, but 16 here. So if children were under 16, the executors would have a trust function, a trust role, and they would look after the money until the very young person got to their 16th birthday, but then they would have to pay the money out to them then. So it's really good practice, and we would recommend it as standard that parents think about putting trust provisions in their will to say that if any beneficiary was under the age of X, the trustees would hold their inheritance until they're that age. Now, it used to be the case in very old wills, sometimes you'll see 18 or 21. These days, and for I would say the past 10 years anyway, 25 has been the default position. Now, from time to time, sometimes I'll have clients say, oh, that still feels a bit young at 25, and they've pushed it out to 30. But everything isn't completely locked up. We have people see in the movies about, these trust funds that are locked up until, children are adults, and it just seems far too restrictive. But with modern wills now, although the child doesn't inherit until they reach that special birthday, there are always flexible provisions in the wills that give the trustees discretion to make advances before that age. If money is really needed to be released, even for driving license or uni fees, school fees, deposit for a flat, whatever it is, they could be given an income from it, and it's so flexible that even say the child at the 23 was just say, for example, head screwed on, really sensible, and the trustees were thinking, there's no point in us running this trust till they're 25. They could manage it now. Then they could appoint the whole lot out to them earlier, but it's if the trustees deemed that appropriate, and it would be at their discretion. So again, just like the lifetime trust planning I spoke about earlier, there's lots of flexibility there. Trustees are in control. Money can still be used to maintain and benefit the child. But they won't get it until they're at that special birthday, and it can't be squandered. Once they get to that birthday, then the trustees must pay it out, and then it's out with their control, and there's nothing that you can do after that. But it's pretty standard will planning these days, and you can see why.
Oh, definitely, absolutely. It's a very good idea. And so in terms of, let's just think about risk for a minute, because, planning for your retirement involves, an attitude to risk, doesn't it? So do women generally, Lindsay, do they consider a different approach to men when they're approaching risk-based products?
Yeah, and I think we need to speak in general terms here, because of course individuals will be different. But overall, I would say yes, women do typically have a different and generally more risk adverse approach to investments than men do. And it's not really a surprise. And I'm going to see if I can quote the right statistics here, but a recent study showed that 75% of articles that were targeted towards men in relation to finances were about how to grow your wealth, how to invest appropriately. Whereas 65% of articles that are targeted to women are focused on household budgeting and how not to spend excessively. So, it's little wonder between how we're communicated to, but also the societal expectations and what we've discussed around, caregiving and taking care of the household. It's understandable that there would be a difference. However, I am seeing quite a considerable impact on age demographics when we're looking at different opinions towards risk. And we are finding that younger generations are much more comfortable with investing and taking a little bit more risk with their investments. It might be the accessibility, there's lots of apps on your phone that you can use now. It might just be that financial education is improving from a younger age, which is great to see. But I guess part of my role is not only to look at the individual's preference towards risk, but also to marry that up with their capacity for loss. How much could they afford fluctuations in an investment, and what's their time frame to accessing? Because all of that paints a picture that will help inform how we invest ultimately. And I know that sustainable investment has been really pertinent, really important of late. I would definitely see I'm seeing more of a trend towards people investing sustainably, or certainly having some sustainable investments, and probably more female focused too. But what we're still looking to see is a little bit more regulation on sustainable investments, because it isn't the most regulated. It's not totally clear cut what defines a sustainable investment as yet. And I think until we start to see a little bit more regulation and we see returns over the long term, because ultimately people want to make the most of their money. They want to do good in the world, but they also want to make sure that they're not investing in a way that they might lose out over the long term. So we are seeing more of a trend towards sustainable investment, but I think there's still a ways to go there.
Yeah, because I suspect the younger contingent of people would be, very interested in what their money is being invested in across the world and how the markets are performing in relation to sustainability and ESG. And I think that there tend to be, I know that the young people I know tend to be much more conscious these days about, global performance tied into sustainability. So, yeah, I guess more regulation is probably key. Did you have any thoughts on that, Gillian, at all?
I am with the type of work we do, it's on the will and the trust kind of planning. So we would absolutely be sitting around the table with people like Lindsay on the financial planning side, and that tends to be, questions posed and responded to by them. But yeah, from time to time, I'm definitely seeing people ask their advisors about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Because I think the world is definitely changing, and I think if we've all got net zero targets, then that's a great thing. And ideally speaking, it's a wonderful thing. But as I said, as you've quite rightly said, Lindsay, as well, the investments have to perform. So, there's a good balance to be had, isn't there? So talking about sort of world markets and the cost of living, how has the cost of living crisis generally affected women and their approach to saving? Let's just say, I also was hoping we could cover off the kind of different rates and bands of income tax in Scotland in relation to that as well. You know, and there's a different charging structure with land and buildings transaction tax in Scotland to what there is in the rest of the UK, although they are extremely similar now. And where you're buying a main residence or investing in property. So maybe you could tell me a bit of your thoughts around that, Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of living crisis has impacted everyone, irrespective of your age, your gender. I think everyone's felt the pinch in one way or another. And it's really impacted our ability and how we look to save for the future. For a lot of my clients, it's caused them to rethink perhaps how much they need to maintain their standard of living throughout their life. And as a result of that, it's probably led to quite a few clients having to rethink or maybe tweak their longer term objectives too. So for us, it's never been more important to understand how to be more tax efficient with savings and how to be savvy with expenditure. And what we're actually seeing more and more is not just clients coming to us to say, I've got this amount of money to invest, how can I do that? But we're seeing a lot of clients come to us to help, or for us to help them to build a financial plan which allows them to show the long-term affordability of their objectives. Because for many, at a time of uncertainty and change, it's reassurance that's the most valuable thing. We can talk a little bit about ways of being as tax efficient and making the most of your savings. And I guess pensions are the critical one when it comes to that. You get tax relief at your marginal rate of income tax on the contribution itself. It's tax-free growth within the fund. And then when you come to retirement, typically 25% of your pot can be taken tax-free as well. So from our perspective, when we're looking at the impact of income tax, that's absolutely a starting point for many to see where they can save a little bit more in the most tax efficient way possible.
Yeah, because I guess the first reaction is the knee-jerk one, isn't it? And if the cost of living changes dramatically, or there's some kind of change to something like the income tax rates and bans, I guess people's first reaction is to pull back and think, oh, I can't spend any money on, and you'll immediately kind of knee-jerk reaction prioritize what you can and can't spend money on.
Yeah.
And it's so tempting for people just to say, I need to stop that direct debit into that pension.
Yeah.
When in an actual fact there are many other things that you can do instead of doing that, because that is assuring your future ability to cope with financial pressures. So,
and I think
yeah.
on that point, what's really interesting, there's loads of online tools that you can use that are free to access. And one that I would encourage everyone on the call just to take a look at is it's a tool that shows the impact on your net income by increasing your employee pension contribution by 1%, 2%, 3%. And what you'll probably find, because of the tax efficiency of it, is that actually there's very little impact on what you take home by increasing your pension contributions just a little bit. And I'm sure that most people on the call will have the capacity to save a little bit more. And the long-term impact for your retirement is huge, but the short-term impact on your ability to meet your expenses day to day is fairly minimal.
Yeah, yeah. And so if somebody decides, let's say one of our viewers today decides that they want to retire, but they don't know whether they've got enough money to retire at this particular moment in time. So how can they go about working all of that out?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the first point, and we've spoken about this already, you'll be fed up hearing me say it, but having really clear retirement objectives. So we need to know time frame to retirement. We need to know what your expenditure will look like in retirement. And that way you can understand how long you have and what you need to do in order to make the most of it and maintain your standard of living. From there, you look at all your potential sources of income within your household. So we're looking at the pensions available, the savings, the investment. Everyone can request a state pension forecast, for example, really easy to do, and it gives you a bit of reassurance. When you add all of this together, you can start to quantify an approximate percentage that you might need to withdraw annually in order to meet your expenditure needs. For some, it might identify a need for you to perhaps reset your expectations a little bit, but for others, you might feel totally comfortable that, yeah, I think I've got enough to last me the course, which is great. It is a complex exercise, and it's not as straightforward as that necessarily, but for anyone that is sitting in that area of uncertainty, that's a starting point. For us as advisors, it's the 5 years leading up to retirement and the first couple of years into retirement that are the absolute pivotal points and often trigger points for clients reaching out to us. So I would really encourage anyone that's in that position and unsure of their next steps, have an initial call with an advisor to point you in the right direction. And whether it's, pension consolidation or income strategy planning, all of these things are things that an advisor can start to help you to get your head round and start to provide that comfort and that reassurance.
I would just add to that, because in addition to on the retirement side, on the estate planning side, where clients would really like to be passing on some wealth either outright or using a trust to children or grandchildren, when I can see that they're high net worth, they're sitting with a lot of wealth. And sometimes you just need that reassurance that using this kind of cash flow modelling that Lindsay's talking about and going through the process to see that actually they've got more than enough. There's plenty surplus there. This is what the inheritance tax will look like, and it just gives them that peace of mind and reassurance that they can afford to make gifts and give with a warm hand, if you like, is something that I often say to their children.
Yeah, I think that's good as well, because you do tend to, you're just so busy squirreling away and working, and you're just at it all the time. It never stops, and and you never really get the chance to sort of sit down and reflect on what you might have saved over the years, or what you might actually, what is your spending power when you retire. It's not something that really ever enters your head until you start actually seriously thinking about retiring, is it? So, okay, let me just say, Gillian, do you think that do women ask you different questions to men?
They do when they're especially when women are in, and as a couple are in to make wills. Quite often, quite a common question that I'm asked by women, and I can't actually remember ever being asked this about men, but if we have a couple in, and the women will often ask, well, what would happen if I pass away? They can be at varying ages, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It doesn't really, the age profile doesn't really matter, but they're worried if they pass away, their whole estate goes to husband owns everything. They would hope that, and standard wills will dictate that the combined wealth passes to the children, but they're worried in case husband, partner meets somebody else, remarries, wills get changed, and basically, inheritance goes sideways, and their children don't get as much as they would hope. And women are very confident about asking that question in front of their partner. It's not a kind of question that comes in by email because they don't want to ask in front. Which is great. And husbands, partners absolutely don't mind that question being asked, and we have a wee bit of a joke about it. But that is something that I am asked, and then that leads on to options. And one popular option that a lot of people do put in place, and particularly if there's a second marriage and children by previous relationships, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's a couple and they've got the same children, is to include life rent trust provisions in a will. Now this depends on affordability, but if they're both financially independent and wouldn't rely on receiving everything from the other spouse, then they can leave either part of the estate, quite often just the house. Sometimes it extends to the whole of the estate in life rent for the surviving spouse partner. And that means that the surviving partner will be able to live in the house, will have a legal right to occupy if it's a property. If there were rented properties, they would be entitled to the rental income. If we were talking about savings, they would be allowed the interest, but not the underlying capital, or quite often it can be an investment portfolio, and they just need the income. They don't need the capital. So it's a kind of right to income or right to occupation, but we do keep it flexible, and we give the trustees power to make payments from the capital if it's needed for the surviving spouse, whoever that would be. And we make these as mirror wills, so nobody knows, generally the order of deaths and things like that. So they're both in the same position. But that's something that gives clients comfort, because they know that, right, well, if I pass away, the assets that I have, I know that they are ring fenced. The capital is ring fenced for the children, but it's also accommodating the surviving spouse being able to have an income, or being able to be advanced capital if they need it. So that's quite a popular tool.
And it must be quite reassuring for the children to know that as well, that the spouse isn't just going to run off into the sunset with everything. But
certainly when it's second marriages and step parents, because that's a real concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the subject of spouses, do you need, if you want to leave everything to your spouse when you die, you don't want to leave it to anybody else but them, do you actually need a will?
You do, and you should, yes. Sometimes it may be that the laws of intestacy will carry your estate depending on the extent of it, the value of it. The laws of intestacy may carry it to the surviving spouse, but even aside from that, if it's an intestate estate, the beneficiaries and family will need to apply to the court for an executor to be appointed. There's an insurance policy called a bond of cation that's always needed when somebody dies without a will. So the add-on costs and delays of having to deal with that are multiples of how much it would cost just to put a will in place. So it's always advisable everybody should have a will, and there can be unintended consequences depending on the laws of intestacy, where actually estate value does go to other people depending on the value. So it just puts it above all doubt to have a will.
Okay, great stuff. Well, I'm just going to ask a couple more quick questions before we move into the Q&A. But let me just ask you this one. Let's say that both parents were to die in an accident and the children were, say, under 16, if they were very young. What could you possibly do to cover off such an eventuality?
Well, I'll take that one as well. So I would go back to saying what I'd mentioned before about setting up the wills so that if any beneficiary is under the age of, say, 25, the estate would be held in trust for them. And as part of that, thinking carefully about who you would appoint in the will as executors and trustees, because those trustees will be, looking after the purse strings, making decisions about any distributions, making decisions on advice, professional advice about whether to put money in the bank, depending how much it is, or invest it. But another very important point is guardianship of children. So
Yeah.
As I said before, children under 16 in Scotland are children. Once you become 16, you become, an adult. And I'm sure, a lot of us as parents will go, what? But they become legally an adult. But under 16, parents will know we're often having to sign slips for school, even school photographs or school trips or lots of things, immunisations. And, there's that slip where it's parent oblique guardian. Now, if that was a really, tragic scenario and young children had lost both parents, the kind of who will look after my children's position, it'll sort itself out. Whether it's an auntie, an uncle, a grandparent, whatever, that's quite a kind of that can be sorted out informally, and that will just happen. But you can include a clause in your will, a guardianship clause, saying that if my husband and I, my wife and I, partner and I, we're both to die while any of our children are under 16, we appoint X or X plus Y as legal guardians. And that goes, it's more, it goes further than saying who you would like the children to live with and be bringing up. That's about passing on your parental rights and responsibilities in law to these named people. So that means that they would be immediately able to sign these consent forms and make these decisions that we as parents do. Yeah. If that clause, if somebody didn't have a will or that clause wasn't included in a will, then whoever it would generally be the people that are bringing up the children, they would have to apply to the court to be awarded parental rights and responsibilities for the children. So just by having this clause in a will, that would avoid all of that delay and expense. So it's really it's really quite a powerful thing that everybody with young children should think about including.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gillian. It's important. And, there's people with disabled children and all sorts of other scenarios, isn't there, as well? And adopted children and lots of,
There is. And I would just
like
on that point, adopted children have all of the rights of blood children. They're natural. Once the adoption process has been completed, the natural parents don't have any rights and responsibilities. That's all cut, and the adoptive parents are treated in every way as the blood parents. But there's a very important and valuable will planning structure that can be put in place if you have either disabled children or children or basically any beneficiary. It doesn't need to be a child. If there is somebody that you would like to inherit from you and they're on means tested benefits and receive services for any reason, if they were to receive an outright inheritance, then that can take them up above the capital, threshold. So they lose all of their benefits, they lose all of their services, they have to pay for them all. And if the capital threshold was, spent, then they would have to reapply. And sometimes they don't get as good a package as they might have originally been on. So there's a way people can kind of, suppose, have your cake and eat it, that if they structure their will to say that rather than, a share of the estate going to X outright, if they say that on my death, if X survives, money should be held for them in a discretionary fund. So basically, it's a trust structure that the trustees would look after that money for that disabled person, if you like, and the person's benefits aren't affected. Everything will continue, but it means that money can be released for all the nice extras that they might benefit from as well. So that's an important thing to keep in mind if anybody is on benefits.
Yes, thank you for that, Gillian. That's very useful. I've just got one quick question for Lindsay before we go to Q&A, and that is, if I've inherited some money from somebody and I don't know what to do with it, do I pay my mortgage off with it or not, or do something else?
It's a great question, and it's one that is very topical at the moment because, as we know, interest rates are continuing to remain at that sort of 5+% on average. For me, there are two trains of thought to consider. So the first one is emotional. A lot of people just don't feel comfortable having debt, having liabilities, and I completely appreciate that. If you receive a lump sum, you want to use it to remove any debt that you may have. And I think unless there was a really compelling argument not to do that, if someone felt really strongly, emotionally, they want to pay off their mortgage, I wouldn't discourage somebody from doing that. However, if you do find yourself in that position, it's really important to understand what you're then going to do with the surplus income that you'll have on a monthly basis. Because if you're spending £1,000 a month on your mortgage, you've got to do something with that money that can help meet other longer term objectives as well. So that's the first train of thought. The second one is financial. Now, historically, when mortgage rates were at sort of 1-2+%, we could quite confidently say that on average, return on investment will be in excess of the interest that you're paying. So financially, it makes more sense to invest than repaying the mortgage if the rates are really good. Now that rates are up at 5%, investments need to work a lot harder in order for that argument to be as compelling. So I guess there's two trains of thought, I suppose, on whether it's better to invest that money or to pay off your mortgage. A couple of things to note is that it's not unreasonable to expect that with the right investment type, with the right risk strategy, you could earn on average in excess of 5%. And important to remember that the interest rates are temporary. We do expect they'll come down, maybe not this year, but they should come down over the next couple of years, we hope. So I guess really it comes down to A, personal preference, and B, speaking to someone that's in the know that can give some indication of what the financial implications might look like for you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Q&A now because we've reached the time for that. I'm going to move in, folks, to the live Q&A session of the webinar now. So I've got a few questions, excuse me, lined up in the box. And as I said at the top of the webinar as well, if we do run out of time, we'll produce a document which we will share alongside the recording of the webinar on the ICAS events page. So let me just pick a question for you here. The first one was, can you provide insights into the average cost of living of hiring a financial planner and how are the fees typically structured? Is it accessible to most women?
Good question, and difficult to give a specific response. I think it really depends on what we're doing. So, for example, the way that Independent Women and Mazars operate is that we will have the first consultation free of charge to anybody. At that consultation, what we're able to do is establish what the need is for financial advice, or whether actually just a little bit of guidance and a point in the right direction is the right thing to do. If there is a need for advice, we can give you a cost estimation at that point in time for what we're looking to do. Now, our costs might vary from a percentage of the assets that you're looking to invest, for example, or it might be a fixed fee or a time cost basis. It really depends on the work. For ongoing relationships, we operate on a tiered structure. We recommend investments that we believe will stand the test of time. We're independent advisors, so we're looking at the whole of market. So from a cost perspective, we wouldn't be recommending anything that we felt the costs would dramatically eat into the potential for returns. I appreciate that's quite a vague answer. I've not been able to give specifics there, but it does really depend on the work that we're doing. I think importantly, if we do have ongoing relationships with clients, we might be looking at certain thresholds of assets to invest. if we're looking at just supporting with one piece of work, we absolutely can do transactional pieces of work where it's just one part of the financial planning process that we support with. So a couple of things that can impact that.
Okay, thank you. I've got two questions that are quite similar. One says about, can you share the link to the online tool, increase of pension contributions impact on take-home income? And the other one says, what are the various free financial planning tools that Lindsay recommends we use? Guess we could put those in the follow-up, couldn't we, as well?
We can. Off the top of my head, I'm sure it's salarycalculator.net, something like that. But if you search salary calculator, it will come up. That's the tool that I would use to input your income. Both there.
I think we lost ourselves for a few minutes. Can we all hear everything?
Yes,
I can hear you.
Okay, Lindsay was in full flow then as well. Did you get cut off, Lindsay?
Don't worry, I think I still continued. I don't think I was aware.
That's okay. We were just talking about the tools, weren't we? So would it be a good idea to put those in the follow-up emails and things after this webinar's finished? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. Well, let's move to the next question before we've got a couple of minutes before I have to close off the webinar and do my final bit. So let's have a look. Would a trust structure be beneficial to protect against loss of home/wealth, for example, if care home fees are needed to be met, or any other beneficial methods?
Yeah, I'll take this one, and this is something that I'm asked about very regularly, and I do a bit of work here. So the kind of the basis comes down to if somebody goes into a care home and they have more than, in Scotland, and have more than £35,000 of capital, they have to self-fund their own care. So a lot of people will come and ask about, what can I do to protect my house? I've maybe got other bits and pieces, but it's really the house that they would like protected for their children, and they ask about a trust. So it comes down to the deliberate deprivation of capital rules. So if somebody was to put their house into a trust and then they were to go into care in the next few years after that, there's a very good chance that the local authority, because they as part of the financial assessment form, they ask you, do you own your own house? Have you ever owned a house that you live in? They want to, get these kind of scenarios out, so they would know, and they can check the land register if you've ever owned it. So they do have a discretion to treat somebody as though they still own an asset that's given it away if they believe that the main reason for the person disposing of it was to deliberately deprive themselves of capital to avoid paying fees. So timing's got a lot to do with it here. So if I do have people approaching me, and it's actually more likely to be the children that are approaching me rather than the parent on behalf of the parent. And sometimes parents very elderly, they've maybe already got a care manager looking after them. They're going for dementia tests or something. And I would just say there's no point. It would definitely not work. Yeah. It would definitely be attacked. If they want to go ahead, I mean, generally they don't, and I put them off, but they would never be in a worse position by doing it. They're not going to get prosecuted with fraud or something like that. It's just the value of the house would have to be taken into account anyway. But yeah. I do have a lot of clients who are late 60s into 70s, no sign that they will need to go into care, and we talk about the different the options, and they ask about a trust, and there is the benefit, which is quite compelling, and I've seen this from my own personal circumstances, where if a house is in trust and people die, the people that are living in previous owners die, the family don't have to wait until confirmation, go through that confirmation probate process through the court. So it means the family can actually, when they feel ready after funeral and things, just start emptying the house, put it on the market and sell it as soon as they like, rather than having to, sometimes potentially wait a year to go through the confirmation process. So that's quite a kind of, and I suppose an unintended benefit for some people who are really, it's the care home fees thing they're thinking about. So I would say it comes down to timing. I have seen it be successful, where the house has been gifted to trust many years ago and people have had to go into care and the local authority haven't looked at it because it's been done so long ago that it would be really difficult for them to say the main reason that you did that was to avoid care home fees when people were fit and hearty and working and all of that. I would say that the statistic is changing. I used to tell people that only 1 in 4 people go into a care home, because people can often manage at home with carers coming in up to 4 times a day, paid for by the local authority. That statistic is now 1 in every 5.5. So fewer people are having to go into residential care. More people are able to stay at home with support. But we all know of somebody in our own families, our friends' families that are in a care home, and we're talking about £2,000 a week in care fees. It's eye-watering. So completely appreciate that people do want to explore planning. So I would say there's nobody can give any guarantees, and this is where the company that went into administration, McClure's, that have been in the media, are getting a kicking, and quite rightly, because they missold these trusts as absolutely working, and nobody can no solicitor can guarantee that it will work, but I have seen it work.
Okay, thank you for that. It's interesting. And now I know that we've got another 2 questions on there, but I'm going to have to wrap up because otherwise we'll be running out of time and people will be disappearing. So I'd like to be able to put the poll up now, which I think might just have appeared on your screens, with 1 question on it. If they could answer that first, that would be really good. And in the questions, in the question box, a Q&A box, there is an international person saying, as an international person working in the UK, would you still recommend paying into a pension despite the likelihood that one day in the future I might return to my home country? Can these pensions be withdrawn and taken to another country? So Lindsay, if you've got a 30-second answer on that one, that would be ideal. But we can always put an answer in the comments, in the sort of webinar information afterwards as well.
Yeah, I think I would say generally there's no harm in doing it because you are abiding by the rules and the tax legislation that's happening, at the point in time that you're living and working in the UK. What is probably important to understand is the tax implications and probably receive advice from an advisor in the country that you're expecting to retire to, because they'll be able to understand what the implications are for UK-based products and how that might impact them in retirement.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. Well, we're almost out of time, sadly. I could talk about this all day, actually. As I mentioned earlier, so we've done our poll. Hopefully people have responded to that. If you haven't responded to it, please tell us anyway what you thought of the webinar today. Lindsay's asked me to tell you that she's more than happy to offer a free 30-minute financial planning consultation to any ICAS member who would like to discuss their own individual circumstances in more detail. And Gillian is also very happy to speak to any member of ICAS about succession planning and asset protection needs to explore how she could help with you with this on a no obligation basis. And contact details for both of these ladies will be sent out to you as part of the follow-up to the webinar. So links to sign up to all ICAS events are available at icas.com/events. let's have a look quickly at what's coming up. We have a Scottish Government Tax Directorate webinar with me on the 15th of May. That's going to be a cracker because nobody ever really gets to speak to the officials from the Scottish Government about what they do in terms of Scottish taxes and the whole devolved piece. So that I'm looking forward to that one as well. We've also got an employment and immigration law update for accountants from the lovely Dawn Dixon, who is also one of my friends, and tax issues regarding loans and dividends. Myself and Chris Campbell will be delivering that webinar on the 29th of May. It's all coming up very quickly. And then we have the ICAS Practice Conference, Navigating the Future, on the 5th of June, which is always a very popular event. So please register now to avoid disappointment as well. So if the registration buttons aren't live on any events, they will become live as time comes by. So just keep your eye on them, and you might spot another webinar that you didn't realise was happening. You can register for that as well. So it only leaves me now to thank Gillian and Lindsay once again, and of course you the audience, for listening to us, participating with us, putting your questions in the boxes, and for joining our webinar today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and thank you very much for joining us. So until next time, goodbye.